Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jeevanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Sravanamangalam Srimadaatatam Bhuvi Grananti Ye Bhurida Jana. So we will continue from the portion which we are studying in the last class, where we find that Sri Ramakrishna is indicating that if one is sincere in spiritual life, if he is sincere for his love of God, then even though the external circumstances which are not favorable gradually turns out to be favorable. So in his words, but if a man who has sincere love for God, then all come under his control. The king, wicked persons, and his wife. Sincere love of God on the husband's part may eventually help the wife to lead a spiritual life. If the husband is good, then through the grace of God, the wife may also follow his example. So as we were indicating that in the nature of the universe, the plan of the nature is such that whatever we desire intensely, the nature will conspire to fulfill our intense desire. It will conspire to create that, to make the circumstances favorable, so that all the so-called the desires are fulfilled. It's not only in spiritual life, in our day-to-day life, what we intensely desire. According to that, the nature will be conspiring to make the favorable circumstances and fulfill your desire. You may say it doesn't happen. As in the last class, we were saying that though we may be professing that I want this, I want that, but within our heart, constantly, most probably, the fear is there. The fear factor is there. I may not get it. I may not attain it. So that's the real thing which you are contemplating, that I may not get it. And that happens. What you contemplate, that happens. If you have the tremendous conviction that this is the thing I want now, the entire means my desire has to be fulfilled. I don't keep any option of ifs and buts. Then you will find that the nature is conspiring to make all the circumstances favorable to fulfill our desires. And that's the thing which is being indicated in Sri Ramakrishna's word. That if we are really intently, we sincerely love God, we will find that even the circumstances which are not favorable gradually is turning to be favorable. And that will help us to lead a more engrossing spiritual life. So that's the thing which we were discussing in the last class. Let's proceed to the next section. So this word, actually, just before saying these words, Sri Ramakrishna, when Master asked that what should one do if one's wife says, you are neglecting me, I shall commit suicide, the Master was very serious. In stern words, what he told, give up such a wife. If she proves an obstacle in the way of spiritual life, let her commit suicide or anything else she likes. The wife that hampers her husband's spiritual life is an ungodly wife. So after such uncompromising reply, when Sri Ramakrishna mentioned that uh, in his words that if a man, if he is a sincere, he has a sincere love for God, then know it for certain, all will come under his control. The king, the wicked persons, his wife, sincere love of God on the husband's part may eventually help the wife to lead a spiritual life. If a husband is good, then through the grace of God, the wife may also follow his example. So after hearing these words, the master was bit the master had a soothing effect. This had a soothing effect on M's worried mind. All the while he had been thinking, let her commit suicide. What can I do? M, this world is a terrible place indeed. Master to the devotee. That's the reason Chaitanya said to his companion Nityananda, listen, brother, there is no hope of salvation for the worldly minded. So why there is no hope of salvation in spite of all the so-called spiritual practices? When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with his devotees used to have this kirtana, congregational singing, even these household devotees used to get exuberant, this emotional upsurge, devotional upsurge. Seeing that, many thought that they are progressing in spiritual life. When it was indicated to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what he told was something interesting, that if a pot has some hole, however you may go on pouring water, it all leaks out, it won't stay. Know it for certain, such exuberance of devotion, which you see temporarily when that there is a congregational singing, it do indicate that they have developed some taste for the divine, but at the same time, they are yet to get detached, had developed the detachment from samsara, from their house, from their worldly life. Unless the detachment is there, that all those exuberances they have, it's less like a foam. It just simply vanishes. It leaks out. It in no way stays. As in our scripture, they say that if you go on if you go on rowing your boat with the anchors, without raising the anchors, will you proceed anywhere? So worldly attachment speaks of that. If you are extremely worldly attached, all the spiritual practices are of no avail. Spiritual practices of the worldly minded persons are like rowing a boat without raising the anchor. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna is indicating that Chaitanya's, in the words of Chaitanya, that is the reason Chaitanya said to his companion Nityananda, listen, brother, there is no hope of salvation for the worldly minded. On another occasion, the master had said to him privately, yes, there is no hope for a worldly man if he is not sincerely devoted to God, but he has nothing to fear if he remains in the world after realizing God. Nor need a man have any fear whatever of the world if he attains sincere devotion by practicing spiritual discipline now and then in solitude. Chaitanya had several householders among his devotees, but they were householders in name only, for they lived unattached to the world. So this is the thing which Sri Ramakrishna is indicating, that after saying about the general, that all those who used to have this exuberance in the congregation, it's not that all of them about whom Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was saying that for them there is no way out. There are a few, though they are in the household, they have developed that sincere love for God. And sincere love for God automatically entails detachment from the worldly pleasures. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the more you proceed towards east, the west automatically falls behind. If we are growing in devotion, then our inordinate attachment for the worldly way of living has to fall off. It is something spontaneous. So such person, what's his state of mind? Sri Ramakrishna in some other context have indicated that such householders who are in the household, as if apparently leading a householder's life, but inwardly he is having that devotion for the Lord and has developed the detachment. Outwardly, they will look like householder, but their mind has already been attached to God and detached from the worldly way of living. Just with the idea of seek not, avoid not, he is performing his household duties, surrendering totally to the divine. As Sri Ramakrishna says, his or her mental attitude is just like a maidservant who, while serving the master, goes on saying that this is my house, the master pointing to the master's house. This is my children, pointing to the master's children, as if she has become a part of that household. But in the bottom of her heart, she knows that this is not her house. These are not her children. Her house, her children is far off in some remote village. It is just for the sake of conversation. She just says it for, it's something superficially. It's not something which she really feels or believes. It's just apparent. As sometimes we say that the way to stay in life is that pretend to be a householder. Sadhu সংসারী সাজবে, সংসারী হবে না, সাধু হবে, সাধু সাজবে না. Means be a holy person, don't pretend to be a holy person, and pretend to be a householder, don't be a householder. For most of us, we just do the opposite. We pretend to be a holy person, though we are not a holy person, and we are extremely attached to the household. We cannot pretend to be a householder, we become householders. So just the opposite is required. So in the family, we find such person who pretend to be householder, just taking the care of their responsibilities, but at the same time, his heart is totally immersed in the divine. Sri Ramakrishna asked him in some other context, can you show me a picture of a bird hatching its egg? When the bird is on the egg, is hatching its egg, its eyes are open, but that eyes do not have any focus. It is just observing without any focus on anything. In Bengali called drishti phel phele. It's very difficult to translate. It means the eyes are looking, but there is a type of indifference. It's not actually looking intently on anything, because its total attention is on the egg which she is hatching. So that way in our family life, that there should be a sense, though we are as if involved with the family life, involved with all the activities, there should be a sense of detachment there. And all the attention should be in the egg. Egg means here the divine who is enshrined in our heart. That there the entire attention should be there. We should be serving the one who is seated in our heart. That is, by staying in family, the way to practice spirituality, in the words of Ramakrishna throughout the gospel, in innumerable analogies he have used to explain this fact, that it should be like just one who is having a toothache. The one who has toothache, he may be doing all the household activities, but the mind is constantly focused on the toothache. He cannot take away his mind from that. Sri Ramakrishna is to say, let God be your toothache. Keeping that mind in God to your duties. The one who is a devotee can keep 3/4 of his mind in God, and just with 1/4 of his mind can take care of all his responsibilities. And know it for certain, the way he takes care of his responsibilities, 1/4 mind, is much, much better than those who are inordinately attached to the worldly way of living. Because we think that the one who is attached to the worldly way of living, his mind is focused to the things he is doing. But actually, it is not the fact. Not even 25% mind is actually fixed in the things he is doing because of his or her inordinate attachment. Most of the mind is engaged either in anticipation or fear or expectations. But a devotee's mind has no anticipation, no fear, no expectation. He has resigned to the will of the divine. Though the three-fourths of mind is with the God, that one-fourth mind is sufficient enough to take care of all the duties. And those who are inordinately attached to the worldly way of living, they cannot even keep 25% of their mind free for the activities, because it has been taken away by all sorts of turmoils in the form of anticipation, fear, expectations. So that's what is being indicated by the words of Ramakrishna. And he's speaking of solitude, that know it for certain that even the one who has realized God, for him, there is no question of attachment. When he comes down from his realization and deals with the world, though he's dealing with the world, in no way attachment can develop, because the realization has given him the conviction that what I am seeing is a mere flow, is a mere projection. It's not the reality. Just that Swami Vivekananda, that's example again and again we give. When he was passing through the desert, he was thirsty, he was in search of water, he saw the mirage, thinking it to be a huge reservoir. He started proceeding towards it, and suddenly it vanished. Then it dawned in his mind that it's a mirage. And what's the difference? Next day, again, when he's passing through the desert, as he is in his body, mind, senses, again he sees that huge reservoir. But today there is a great difference. Nothing can drag him towards that. He knows it's a mere projection. So that's the thing which is being indicated here, that one who remains in the world after realizing God, there is, for such a person, there is no fear. There is no need for such a man to have any fear whatever of the world, if he has realized God. And even if he has not realized God, if he has sincere devotion by practicing spiritual discipline now and then in solitude, then also he need not fear. Because as Sri Ramakrishna's Guru Totapuri used to say, that the mind is like a brass vessel or like a copper vessel. It had to be polished now and then. To maintain its shine, it has to be polished again and again. So solitude acts like that. That when we are in the samsara, the mind do gather some stain. So now and then we have to go to the solitude. It's like retreat. In the war, the word retreat actually came from the war. In the war, when the army finds it is difficult to cope up with the confronting army, so sometimes they start retreating. That retreat actually is not a defeat. They retreat with a plan that let's go back. Our contending army will think as if we are escaping, that we are the losers, but know it for certain, we will come back with regained force, with the regained energy, regained force. So that retreat is meant for they're getting refreshed, so gaining in strength. So that's why this solitude now and then is required, to go and dive deep in contemplation, where the sanskaras of the spiritual practice becomes prominent in the mind. With such mind, we come back, and what we gain in our contemplation, that we spend out in our service. So these are the two things which Sri Ramakrishna is saying, that if you have realized God, there is no fear. And even if you have not realized God, now and then make it a point to go in solitude. It's not possible for you to go in solitude forever, but now and then, if it is possible for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, just go in solitude. Spend the time exclusively in contemplation, and then with renewed energy, renewed vigor, come back and again lead your worldly life, trying to keep in your mind what you are contemplating on in your solitude. that should create a deep samskara, that should try to prevail over all the worldly samskaras. And that way, even in family, we can, though we have not realized God, we can lead a detached life. And that's what Sri Ramakrishna is indicating. And as an example, he's saying Chaitanya had several householders among his devotees, but they were householders in name only, for they lived unattached to the world. It was noon, the worship was over, and food offerings had been made in the temple. The doors of the temple were shut. Sri Ramakrishna sat down for his meal, and Narendra and other devotees partook of the food offerings from the temple. Sunday, October 22, 1882. It was the day of Vijaya, the last day of the celebration of the worship of Durga, when the clay image is immersed in the water of a lake or river. About 9 o'clock in the morning, M was seated on the floor of the master's room at Dakshineshwar, near Sri Ramakrishna, who was reclining on the small couch. Rakhal was then living with the master, and Narendra and Bhavanath visited him frequently. Baburam had seen him only once or twice. Master, did you have any holiday during the Durga Puja? M, yes, sir. I went to Keshav's house every day for the first 3 days of the worship. Master, is that so? M, I heard there a very interesting interpretation of the Durga Puja. Master, please tell me about it. M, Keshav Sen held daily morning prayers in his house, lasting till 10 or 11. During these prayers, he gave the inner meaning of the Durga Puja. He said that if anyone could realize the Divine Mother, that is to say, could install Mother Durga in the shrine of his heart, then Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartika, and Ganesha would come there of themselves. Lakshmi means wealth, Saraswati knowledge, Kartika strength, and Ganesha success. By realizing the Divine Mother within one's heart, one gets all this without any effort whatever. So, well, Sri Ramakrishna won't subscribe to this idea. As we find Swami Vivekananda in his lecture, much later, saying in a very simple way that where God is the means, world is the end. It may appear to be religion, but know it to be certain that it is nothing but sheer materialism. God is the means. I don't want God. I want this world. I'm happy with the wealth, with all this academic learning, with all the strength and success. These are the things I want. God is just the means. And that's what Keshav was saying, that if you have Durga in your heart, they all come automatically, as if those are the things for which one is to worship Durga. So that's why we will find that Sri Ramakrishna listened to the description, questioning M now and then about the prayers conducted by Keshav. At last he said to him, don't go hither and thither. Come here alone. Those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. So very, very specifically, pinpointedly, he is saying this. It is not that he wants to just get hold of his devotees. He wants to save them from all such ideas which goes, all the ideas of materialism which goes in the name of spirituality. He wants his devotees to be sincere in their devotion. There shouldn't be some dross in their, which gets mixed with their spiritual ideas. It should be cleansed from all the dross. So that's why he is very, very specific as per his instruction, that those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. Boys like Narendra, Bhavanath, and Rakhal are very intimate disciples. They are not to be thought lightly of. Feed them one day. What do you think of Narendra? So feeding a holy man is considered a meritorious act. So he's saying, feed them. So this may say that these are all the injunctions which has been made for some mercenary gains, that the holy man should be fed, otherwise from where he's going to get food. So these are the instructions which has been given in the scriptures for two. That's the nurture, the so-called, the ones who are so-called holy men and who are not doing any household duties, just taking the name of the God, and so for them, the spiritual injunctions are there that feed them. But why to feed a holy man? Why to help him in with all sorts of day-to-day needs? Just think that in the present, even in the present day, for the research scholars in the university, every year so much of money is allocated. That why that most of the research are of no use, it goes trash. But why the government has made it a rule that all the universities should have a considerable amount of the fund only for this research work, where the students are doing research. For that, they are getting this lot of funds, stipends, and other things. So much money. Why? That every organization should have R&D and research and development. These are all government policies. Why? Though most of the research is of no use, because the government knows, the society knows, that though most of the research is of no use, it won't actually help the society. But if we make a policy that a considerable amount of our resource should go for this thing, then suddenly one or two such research will be just simply revolutionary. It will change the social structure, economic structure. That's what has happened. You just see the history, the human history for the last 200, 300 years. That suddenly, that though most of the research is trash, but from all those trash, suddenly some discoveries, some inventions changes the total social structure. So we can afford that West only because of this revolutionary one or two inventions or discoveries. Similarly, in spiritual life, so much money is, sometimes you may feel, is West, because the so-called person who is a holy man, here, of course, Narendra Bhavana, they are all sincere seekers. Rakhal, they are all very sincere seekers. But even if that they are not sincere seekers, that the general tradition, the Indian tradition is that give something to the holy man. Many will ask the question that, are they sincere? Why should I give them? I don't know. But that's the culture which enables now and then a Ramakrishna to evolve. That such system, if that system was not there, the one who is intently that devoted to the divine, for whom all the responsibilities have fallen off, if the society is not taking care of him, the spiritual revelations that comes from him, which is the life-saving philosophy for the entire humanity for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, we won't have that. So this feeding the holy man that's why considered such a meritorious act, because that's the thing which sustains the society. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is indicating here, that they are not to be thought lightly of. Feed them one day. What do you think of Narendra? I think very highly of him, sir. Master, haven't you observed his many virtues? He is not only well versed in music, vocal and instrumental, but he is also very learned. Besides, he has controlled his passions and declares he will lead a celibate life. He has been devoted to God since his very boyhood. How are you getting along with your meditation nowadays? What aspect of God appeals to your mind, with form or without form? M. Sir, now I cannot fix my mind on God with form. On the other hand, I cannot concentrate steadily on God without form. Master, now you see that the mind cannot be fixed all of a sudden on the formless aspect of God. It is wise to think of God with form during the primary stages. So this is something very, very significant. That to think of God with form in this Vedantic tradition, though we think of the absolute as formless, he's saying that in the primary stages, to think of God with form is highly effective. Why it is so effective? Why that meditating on God with form can enable our spiritual evolution very quickly. To understand that, we will resort to some discussion of Swami Vivekananda in one of his lectures. Very nicely, he mentioned that just if you analyze your thoughts, each and every thought, you will find each and every thought in our mind. We are thinking so many things, but each and every thought, if you analyze, you will find it has two components, name and form. Anything. The moment, just suppose I'm sitting here, there is no flower near me, I say a rose. That name rose immediately enables me to visualize the form, the smell, everything I visualize in my mind, though it is not there. So the name is related with a form. It always gets associated. Whenever we are thinking, each and every thought has these two components, name and form. Within my mind, I'm speaking. When I'm speaking, constantly I'm visualizing. The moment the mother thinks of the child, the moment she thinks of the child, the name of the child comes to her mind, and immediately along with that, the form comes. She visualizes. So all the thoughts have these two components, name and form. Now, when I'm trying to fix my mind on one thought, say the Ishta Vritti, or my chosen ideal, I say it is formless. Yes, it may be that as per your ultimate principle is concerned, it is formless. But if I try to think it as a form, how it helps? As each and every thought component has two things, name and form. The moment you are trying to concentrate on an ideal for which you have, you represent it with a form, then what happens? This thought with which you are trying to concentrate your mind, this thought which is going to contain all other distractive thoughts, all other distractions, this thought is powerful, it becomes powerful enough with the name and the form, both the components it has. If at the very beginning stage, if we just think of the abstract ideal as formless and try to just go on contemplating on God as formless, though we are repeating the name God, of course, whatever may be the religious tradition, God is represented by certain form of name. So you most probably are repeating the name to keep your mind fixed on God. But the imagination factor, the visual factor of each and every thought, that is free. It goes on visualizing all other forms, all the forms. So the repeating of the name becomes mechanical. You're repeating something, but the mind is going as a visual factor. The audible factor has been taken care of by repeating the name, but the visual factor, the form, that you have no component to take care because your God is formless, and then it roams about all around. So the repetition becomes something mechanical. It in no way can become very effective. If I think of God with a form, then my thought component has both the name and form to contend with all other distractions. It becomes very easy. The moment I am visualizing the form of the divine, then the mind cannot deviate to some other form. because you're imagining a certain form. That this thought with the two components of name and form is quite strong enough to contend with such other distractive thoughts, which too have the two components. So that way, in the primary stage, it is very, very helpful to think of God with form. Ultimately, we should always forget that the means is not the goal. Ultimately, when we go to the merge in that absolute, the realization, the forms will all fall off. We can even realize that God in his absolute sense. But this is a practice. All the confusion arises when we take the way to be the goal. As Buddha used to say, that I am pointing to the moon, and people take the index finger to be the moon. That all the things which are speaking of is the way, is the index finger. It is pointing at something. But they take the index finger to be the moon. They don't see the moon. So though the formless aspect may be the thing which we are aspiring for finally, but with the form, when we start our journey, it makes the path much more effective. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. Now you see that the mind cannot be fixed all of a sudden on the formless aspect of God. It is wise to think of God with form during the primary stages. M, do you mean to suggest that one should meditate on clay images? Master, why clay? These images are the embodiments of consciousness. So the images are the embodiments of consciousness. That when, even as per the principle of Vedanta is concerned, that the entire universe is a projection of the divine. If that be so, when I say that God is not in the clay image, I am restricting, I am limiting God by saying that I say he's omnipresent, he's everywhere, but he's not in this clay image. My words are contradictory. If he's everywhere, if he has projected as the universe, what I see is apparent. Essentially, it is the divine and divine alone. Because the ultimate reality is getting conditioned by the mind and the senses, it is appearing as this universe. So in reality, the clay image is not clay, it is the Lord. So in Bhakti Shastras, they say that we cannot limit the divine, how he will find expression. Innumerable are the ways he is finding expression. But in some of the forms, in some of the aspects, his manifestation is more vivid. As has been spoken of in Bhagavad Gita, in the 10th chapter, the Vibhuti Yoga, where the Lord's Vibhuti, that though he is as substance, essentially he is present everywhere, but he manifests more in some of the objects. So similarly, the clay image, which is meant for the worship, especially in Ramanujacharya used to speak of those images as Archavataram, that the Lord manifests him spatially in all those forms in which the devotees perform the worship. So don't think them to be this clay image. That whenever when someone is to say that this form of the divine is Mrinmoy, means made of clay, he will say, no, it is Chinmaya. It is not Mrinmaya. After even from our, the way we perceive the objects, nothing is inert. Everything that what we are seeing is the projection of the consciousness and consciousness alone. Consciousness is taking certain form. All our perceptions are embodiments of consciousness. For what we perceive is not outside. That which is outside is merely a suggestion, which activates the mind and enables consciousness to be projected in a particular way. As we give that example again and again, when I see the red flower, it is not the redness is outside. Something is outside as a suggestion which activates my mind in a particular way. That light comes and strikes my retina, the light's function is over, it gets converted into some nervous impulse, which reaches my brain, the organ of the mind. And when it reaches the so-called color center, the color is projected from there to envelop the flower, to give it the sense of redness. So it is a consciousness. Again, the mind by itself cannot project. Only the mind, when it is getting activated by the consciousness, the mind is in association with the consciousness. Then only, when I'm sleeping, it doesn't happen. When the mind is in association with the consciousness, then it's being projected, as if the consciousness is being projected ultimately as that redness. So when the consciousness is getting limited by certain adjuncts, that's what we see as this world. It is the consciousness getting limited in certain way or other to find expression as this world of name and form. So when I worshipping the clay image, it is something within which is being expired. So that's why Swamiji used to say that in Vedanta we don't speak of inspiration. We all speak of expiration, not inspiration. Inspiration means something is coming within from outside. Inspiration, that in means coming within. So he played a pun with the word by saying it is not inspiration, it is expiration. It is all within which is finding expression outside as all these objects of name and form. If that be so, it is the same consciousness which is finding expression as the object which I am worshipping. So why see it as a clay image, which is a hallucination? The real thing is its consciousness. When Swami Vivekananda in the West was giving lecture that everything is consciousness and consciousness alone. No, everything is the self. And that way transcend the suffering of the world, because all the things which appears in the form of pleasure and pain, all the dualities, these are mere appearances. But actually you are the self and self alone. Someone from the audience stood up and immediately appreciated Swamiji by saying, that's a wonderful way to hypnotize ourselves and get rid of suffering. Just always think you are the self, that way you are hypnotizing yourself and you can get rid of the suffering. And she appreciated. That is good. Even by conditioning our mind with some hallucinatory effect, by creating some hallucination, if I can get rid of suffering, it's good. But Swami Vivekananda immediately retorted back, Madam, what I am saying is not hallucination. It's a fact. You are already in hallucination. What I am doing is I am removing your hallucination. You're already, that just to see the world of name and form itself speaks of the hallucination. I am de-hallucinating you. It's not that by thinking that your consciousness and consciousness alone is hallucination, or this image is a consciousness is a hallucination. Actually, seeing it as the image is an hallucination. It is a product of delusion. When you try to see it as an embodiment of the divine, you are de-hypnotizing your mind. You're already hypnotized, you're de-hypnotizing. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna is saying that why clay image? These images are the embodiments of consciousness. Even so, one must think of hands, feet, and other parts of the body. But again, I realize that the mind cannot be concentrated unless one meditates in the beginning on God with form. You have told me so. Well, God can easily assume different forms. May one meditate on the form of one's own mother? Master, yes. Mother should be adored. She is indeed an embodiment of Brahman. So not mother as the biological mother. That's the interesting. That when I see the clay image as clay, that's not a worship. It is not the clay, it is the Lord. That clay is the embodiment of the divine. So here also the words are very important. Yes, mother can also be adored, but not just as a biological mother, because she is the embodiment of Brahman. That like any other object in the world, which is the embodiment of Brahman, your mother is also an embodiment of Brahman. As you already have a love, a sense of affinity with the mother, so when you contemplate on mother, thinking him as the embodiment of Brahman, the meditation can become very, very effective, spontaneous, because already that love is there for that. So you are just now transforming it as a spiritual practice by thinking that it is an embodiment of the Brahman. We find Sri Ramakrishna again and again giving the same instruction. When a widow came to Sri Ramakrishna saying that, see, I have no one to call my own, but one of my nephew is a small boy. I have to take care of him, and I have developed an inordinate attachment for him. I find that my mind is getting distracted even during my worship. It constantly thinks of the small child. And Sri Ramakrishna's instruction was wonderful. He never told that try to forget him. He told, what you are doing is okay. Just think that you are not serving your nephew. It is a child, Krishna, the Gopala, whom you are serving. So this is just the sublimation which Sri Ramakrishna is speaking of. Here also it is a sublimation, not subjugation, that my love for the mother is an attachment. So I should try to subjugate this type of life. I will try to repress this type of love. No, sublimate it. Sublimate it by thinking your mother as the embodiment of the Brahman. M sat in silence. After a few minutes, he asked the master, what does one feel while thinking of God without form? Isn't it possible to describe it? After some reflection, the master said, do you know what it is like? He remained silent a moment and then said a few words to M about one's experiences at the time of the vision of God with and without form. So this is the thing which M is not narrating. It's something, he kept it confidential. That's something Sri Ramakrishna told M about the experience of the vision of the God with and without form. Just M is mentioning here that, and after that he's keeping silent. Most probably, as it seems here, as when he's narrating everything, why he have not narrated, most probably Sri Ramakrishna never wanted to relate these words of the experiences, the vision of the God with or without form, because these descriptions doesn't make any sense to the one who are just aspiring to reach the spiritual goal. Just as we go on saying again and again, that the one who have not tasted the mango, however you may go on describing the taste of mango, it doesn't make any sense. That's why Buddha was silent about the ultimate. That the general notion is Buddha was an atheist. He was not an atheist. He was just silent about the absolute. When someone asked him whether God is, he never answered, thinking that most probably he doesn't believe in God. The next question about also God is not, that also didn't answer. He kept silent because he knew that it is something which is not the common fund of experience of all. If you speak of something of which the experience is not common to both the narrator as well as the one who is listening, you can never relate. We can relate with our words only when our perceptions are alike. What I see, you have also seen, then only I can relate through words. What I have realized, you also have realized, then only I can express through words. Otherwise, what I have realized, if all other have not realized, however I may try to use my language, I can never express it. So that's why most probably we find that M is not speaking about that Ramakrishna remained silent a moment and then said a few words to M about one's experiences at the time of vision of God with and without form. And there it ends. Master, you see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand this correctly. Suppose there are treasures in a room. If you want to see them and lay hold of them, you must take the trouble to get the key and unlock the door. After that, you must take the treasures out But suppose the room is locked, and standing outside the door, you say to yourself, here I have opened the door. Now I have broken the lock of the chest. Now I have taken out the treasure. Such brooding near the door will not enable you to achieve anything. So you have to go and really open the door, just thinking that I have unlocked the door, I have entered, I have just broken the lock of the chest, I have taken out the treasure, just thinking, you don't get the treasure. So you may say, what Sri Ramakrishna is just mentioning here? He's actually indicating that you must practice discipline. This Sri Ramakrishna's words are sometimes so simple that we sometimes miss that actually he's speaking of some profound truths which has been spoken of in the scriptures. In Yoga Shastra, in the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali Yoga Sutra, there is the sutra, the 9th sutra of the first chapter. What it is? Shabda Jnana Anupati Vastu Shunya Vikalpa. Vikalpa means verbal delusion, or you can say imagination. What is imagination? Shabda Jnana Anupati Vastu Shunya. So these technical things Sri Ramakrishna is saying in a very simple word. What it's speaking actually? That our mind is constantly breaking into thought waves. Even in deep sleep, it doesn't stop. The waves are there, the vrittis are there. There are two things. One is vritti and another is the content of the waves. That what I'm thinking is the content of the wave. That is a pratyaya. Now, based on the pratyaya, there can be 5 types of vritti. In the Yoga Sutra, they told that when the content of the wave is matching with what I'm seeing, that is pramana. So that pramana means that is something which is consensual reality. We all say that when I say red, I say something is red, you also say something is red. We all consent that it is real. So this speaks of consensual reality, consensus reality. So that is pramana. And the next is viparyaya, where the pratyaya, the content of the wave, doesn't match with what you are seeing. It happens. Like when I am seeing a snake in a rope. Actually, it is a rope, but the content of the vritti, the pratyaya is the content of the vritti, the knowledge which I'm getting there is of a snake. So it is not matching. That is viparyaya. And then comes this vikalpa. Just why we are saying that, you'll find that how interesting the simple words of Ramakrishna actually is speaking of some profound truth which has been spoken of in the scriptures. What is this vikalpa? Shabda Jnana Anupati Vastu Shunya. Now, there can be another type of vritti as per the pratyaya concept. What is that? Suppose I'm thinking of a palace in the sky. Is it ever possible? It's never possible. There cannot be a palace in the sky. But in my mind, I can think. So, Shabda Jnana Anupati, when I say this palace in the sky, or if lotus in the sky, Akasha Kushuma, a lotus in the sky, then what is happening? The Shabda, when I'm saying Shashasringa, a hare, a rabbit with horns. Rabbit never have horns. So when I say that word doesn't have any corresponding reality at all. So that is vikalpa. It is mere imagination. It has no such factual reality with it. So why, in what way we can relate to the words of Ramakrishna here? So when we speak of spiritual, so-called the spiritual knowledge, for us it is sabda jnana anupati vastu shunya. It is all vikalpa. It's all mere imagination. Because as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that small child, by hearing, when the elders were quarreling among themselves, they use the word God's promise. They have heard from their elders the word God's promise, and now when the children quarrel among themselves, they also say God's promise. I haven't said such and such thing. The parents don't know, the children don't know what is God, and in His name they are swearing. So that's all is vikalpa. You are speaking some word which has no content. So such speech in no way is going to help us. Why we are saying this? In Yoga Sutra, they say all the vrittis can be klishta as well as aklishta. They can lead to suffering as well. They can lead to placidity and liberation, tranquility. Even vikalpa, imagination, can lead to placidity and imagination, liberation. Let us try to understand that. Then we will relate to these words of Ramakrishna. That vikalpa, in general, we find that all such imagination which has no tangible reality, as corresponding tangible reality, they are all useless. But let us take this example of a person who have tasted the mango. This again, let us take this example and try to understand how vikalpa can be helpful. The one who have tasted the mango, he comes and describes the taste of mango to a group of people who have not tasted the mango. Now, among those people who have not tasted the mango, a few may be not interested at all. They hear, but they're indifferent. Okay, forget it. For that, what this mango, we don't want to taste. All those nonsense he's speaking of. They even doubt whether something such as mango is there or not. They just hear and brush it off. That's one category. Another, they hearing that the mango is sweet and it has a nice flavor. They believe that there must be a fruit, but they never ever grow the motivation to really taste the mango. They just go on discussing about the taste of mango. There's a second category. One is indifferent, another go on discussing. The third, after hearing, now they are in search of a mango so that they can taste it. Now, for the three, all these three groups of people, what is there? As long as they have not tasted the mango, it is just vikalpa. The taste of mango which they're thinking of is just vikalpa, it's just imagination. It has no corresponding reality for them, for those who have not tasted the mango. It is mere imagination. As long as you have not tasted, it is mere imagination. For the first two categories, it remains as imagination. It is in no way going to help them. But the third category, that who gets motivated to taste the mango, their imagination is going to get converted into realization. Their imagination is going to get converted into realization. So vikalpa can also be aklishta, as per our attitude, as per our perspective. So in spiritual life also that happens. After reading the scriptures, many are indifferent to it. Some are quite happy just to discuss about it. And a few just make it a point, what's been spoken of in the scriptures, we have to realize it. That speaks of practicing the discipline. And this imagination is getting converted into realization. Today's imagination gets converted into tomorrow's realization through the practice. Otherwise, that imagination is in no way going to help us. It remains the vikalpa, which is in no way going to help us. Now you can relate to the words of Ramakrishna, that for most of us, spirituality just remains in the level of discussion. We never take it. It remains in the level of discussion and in the realm of belief. We never make it a point to realize it in our life. As long as we don't do that, it is as good as just a person who knows there is a treasure in the room. Instead of trying to unlock and go and get the treasure, he's just sitting and thinking, I have unlocked the door, I have broken the lock, I have entered, I've opened the treasure, I've got the treasure. He's just imagining. Did he really get it? No. So his vikalpa is never going to get converted into realization. So it remains always Shabda Jnana Anupati Vastu Shunya. He's speaking some word, but that he's creating some knowledge in his mind, but there is no corresponding reality to it. So it remains just as an imagination. So to make today's imagination into realization, that spiritual practice, the disciplines which has been prescribed, that has to be resorted to. Just going on discussing on it, on visualizing it mentally won't help. That's what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. So again, we read these words of Ramakrishna before we conclude today's discussion. You see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand this correctly. Suppose there are treasures in a room. If you want to see them and lay hold of them, you must take the trouble to get the key and unlock the door. After that, you must take the treasures out. But suppose the room is locked and standing outside the door, you say to yourself, here I have opened the door, now I have broken the lock of the chest, Now I have taken out the treasure. Such brooding near the door will not enable you to achieve anything. You must practice discipline. With this, we stop our discussion today. We'll continue with Sri Ramakrishna's conversation with him again in next class. Thank you all. Namaskar.